Since we're live streaming, if you guys ever have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat, and then we have somebody standing by that can read them to me. But first, let's sort of quickly go through the hot shop for anybody who hasn't seen a demonstration before. So Colin down there is right by our furnace. This holds about 500, 600 pounds of glass, and inside sits a big ceramic crucible. So it's basically a big ceramic bowl that we can throw cold glass into and fill up, and then we can gather out of there, and that's what we'll be working with today. Then we have our nice pipe warmer. Hot glass only sticks to hot things, so we have to preheat all of our pipes. They're all made out of stainless steel, and we have punty rods and we've got blowpipes. We'll sort of talk about the difference later, but if we were to just take a cold stainless steel pipe, take it into the furnace, it's not actually going to pick up any material. Colin's going to go ahead and grab his blowpipe. The difference between the blowpipes and the punties is that the blowpipes are hollow. So they're basically just a big metal tube, and they have that nice mouthpiece on at the bottom. That's going to allow Colin to physically inflate the glass. So he's going into our reheating chamber. You'll notice when Colin starts to pull glass out of the furnace, it's going to set up pretty quickly. So in order to heat it back up to working temperature, we'll go right in and out of our reheating chamber. Colin's got that nice cherry red glow. That's how he knows he's ready to go. And then Colin will be working on our bench. So you'll sort of see him go back and forth between the reheating chamber and the bench. That's just sort of where we can sit down. You'll notice he has to turn a lot. So to have those nice rails makes it a lot easier on your arms. Colin's making a quick collar. And this studio is a public access studio. So there's somewhere between like 30 and 40 artists that use this space. So our tank is entirely colorless glass. So Colin's going to get ready and he's going to pick up, and I can show different colored glass. We can add these on separately, and this will allow us to sort of make the glass look like it's all one color. Colin's setting that collar up. So that collar just makes it so that none of the colored glass gets onto the head of the pipe. Sometimes you'll get a pipe out of the bin and there'll be a little chunk of color, and then suddenly we got a blue piece instead of a clear piece. Colin's going to come over to our pickup oven, and this sits at about 900 degrees, which is what annealing temperature is for glass. Oh, that's not as big of a chunk as I thought it was. Colin can pick that right up. And since the bar is a little bit thicker, we have to warm it up before we can start sticking it to the hot glass. If Colin were to just pick up this chunk of bar that I held earlier in my hand right onto that hot pipe, the thermal shock from the heat of the glass and the cool air is going to be enough to physically break that object. So Colin's going to heat this up to working temperature, which is all the way back up to that 2100 degrees of the furnace. So color bar is really nice to work with in this kind of environment. Factories like Libby, they probably wouldn't use color bar. They would melt a color in their furnace. And how we get glass in color isn't really like paint. It's not really working with pigments or anything. Everything is done chemically. So if we wanted to make blue glass, like Libby has probably some copper blue glass, they would throw a little bit of copper and use that metal oxide in order to tint the entire tank of glass. And that would make it so that they could be working with blue glass for like a month, and then they would do pink, and then purple, and then green, and then that's how their furnace would operate. Here we only have one furnace, so we have the colorless, and then we can add it on separately. And there's a couple different ways you can add color onto glass. Colin's working with color bar, so it'll make our object look like it's one color all the way through. We also work with frit sometimes, so if you guys have ever taken a workshop with us, we'll have this tiny crushed glass. I can go show it to you. This gives sort of more of a painterly approach. So Colin could roll directly into this glass, and since the pieces are small enough, it'll heat up fast enough that it'll just stick to it. And that can give more of a painterly look. It can also be a lot quicker because we don't have to heat that up. Colin's gonna get this nice and shaped up. And this little metal table you see Colin rolling across is our marver table. It comes from the Italian word for marble, loosely. It's just a nice big stainless steel table that allows Colin to shape up the glass, but it's also allowing him to cool specific areas of the glass. You'll see as we start inflating our bubble of it, cooling and heating in specific places is really important for us. We like to say that glass has this memory. So every time Colin touches it with a tool or lets it get a little bit hotter, it's going to remember that later on. Colin's getting that nice and shaped up. The tough thing about color bar is if we just stab up that chunk and try to gather on top of it, you can really easily trap air bubbles just because of those seams. And I know Colin doesn't want any bubbles. Nice and clear. Air bubbles are tricky. We can add them on separately and sort of have them encased in the glass, and that air can be trapped. But they can also cause problems later on. If they're too thin, they can break really easily and then be really sharp. Or they can just sort of be a little bit ugly. So I know Colin wants this nice and smooth. Nice and smooth. Colin's gonna let that set up a little bit. If Colin were to just go right back into that furnace while that color bar is really, really hot, that bar can really easily get overheated and then fall right off into the furnace. And then everybody's making gold stuff for like 3 to 5 years till we shut this thing off.
Not gonna happen.
Ideally. That's why we're waiting for it to set up. I've seen somebody drop color in the furnace once and you have to like hurriedly fish it out. But that's no fun. Once it sinks to the bottom, you're done. Colin's gonna take another dip on top. Is it bubbly? So when we're working in here, we're really working in layers. So Colin can't really gather up all of the glass that he needs at once. Think of it like dipping a chopstick into honey. You can't really wind all that up. So Colin's gonna let this layer cool off a little bit. And he'll even out the heat in between his color bar and his outer layer of clear. And you see the difference in the color cutting out a bubble. If he only has a couple, we can do this pretty easy, but if they get too deep, it gets challenging. Since that glass is really, really hot on the outer layer, he can really do a lot of manipulating right now. So once he's got that nice cut mark melted in, he'll come in with his wooden block tool, and he'll make sure it's a nice, even, round shape. You'll hear us talk a lot about the Q-tip shape. And that's sort of the shape the glass naturally wants to be. And if Colin were to just come right out of the furnace and turn really evenly, eventually it'll go back to that shape. But this tool allows us to cheat a little bit. When we're working in here, heating is really the name of the game. So the hottest the glass will ever be is when it comes right out of the furnace. So you really want to like use that heat to your advantage. Colin's evening that out. No cut mark, melted right back in. He's gonna put a little bit of air in there. So he's doing what we call a cap and blow. Or I guess a blow and cap. So he'll blow into the pipe, cap his thumb over the end of the pipe, and then that air has nowhere else to travel except for directly into that glass. And the air goes where the glass is the hottest. So Colin doing that shaping with that tool really allows him to have control over how inflated this gets. I'm guessing Colin's taking another dip on this. Yep. Right now, Colin has enough glass to maybe make like a cup, but with that big of a chunk of color bar, you don't really want to work small. You really want to stretch it out and sort of use its properties. Colin will let that set up. Now he sort of has to worry about his bubble. So if he lets this go too hot and goes into the furnace, his bubble can really easily collapse. Getting his block ready. Prepared.
No bugs.
No bubs. Colin's taking what we call a strip gather. So it can be sort of hard to control how much glass you're actually getting out of the furnace. So Colin can use a little bit of gravity to physically pull that material off of the bubble. And now you can really see the difference between the clear and the color. gonna give it a good block. And these wooden blocks are made out of a special type of wood. They're made out of a fruit wood. So I think these are cherry, but fruit wood has a really tight grain pattern, so there's not a lot of sap in there. So you notice these blocks don't catch on fire really quickly. That lack of sap allows it to stay really, really waterlogged. So those tools stay waterlogged, and that allows it to create a steam barrier. So the wood's never actually touching the glass. This is the Leidenfrost effect. So it's that same thing that happens when you have a hot pan on your stove and you throw water on it and the water dances around. That's that steam happening. Now Colin's got his nice blow hose hooked up. This sort of allows him to blow on his own. So normally we could work a little bit more closely, but right now Colin has this nice hose so he can keep his germs to himself. Colin's gonna give it a paper. What he's using right now is our newspaper tool. This is about 8 to 10 sheets of newspaper folded up. This is the closest we can ever get to physically touching the glass. So the hardest part about working with this material is that while it's hot, we can't really like set it on the table or feel it with our hands. So that newspaper is the closest we can get to really feeling the profile of the glass. So Colin's gonna use that paper and he's gonna really cool down that bottom. Now he's gonna go over to our marver table and he's gonna cool that bottom so that way we have a nice bottom weight to the object. When we're working in here, we really have to plan ahead for when it comes out of our annealer. So we wanna make sure that bottom is nice and heavy because when we're working with glass, we have to understand how fragile of a material it is. And the demonstrations we make in here are usually objects that are designed to be functional. So Colin wants to make sure it has that nice bottom weight, so that way when somebody's using this bowl, they don't really have to worry about it breaking out the bottom. Colin's giving it that nice angle. And when we talk about the bubble, we really talk about it like a body. So up by the pipe, how we want that glass to end up. Colin's putting in our constriction line. He's giving it a quick paddle. None of the pieces in the collection have a pipe stuck to the end of them, right? So we have to have a way to get it off of the pipe. And Colin's using his jacks, which are sort of our iconic glass blower tool. This allows us to create a point where we can tell the glass to break off of the pipe. And this will become important later on. But once Colin has that constriction line in, he can really start to work on the shape of our bowl. This pretty much is how every object we make in here starts. So you inflate your bubble out, you put in your constriction line, and then we can start working from here. So I know Colin's making a bowl, so he wants to keep it nice and squat and low. But if we were to make a vase, we could physically elongate this bubble out. We could do all kinds of different things with it. But you'll see Colin holding it up a little bit. He's making what we call a skittle. So it's sort of the start of our bowl. Colin's making a low bowl today, which is a challenging shape. So he wants to keep everything nice and low. A high bowl is like your cereal bowl, something you need tall walls on, but a low bowl is like a fruit bowl. Something designed for display. Just making sure that jack line's nice and tight. And he can use his jacks in a lot of different ways. You'll notice this is all of the space that we have on our tool deck. So a lot of our tools have to have a lot of different functions. So Colin will use his jacks in tons of different ways. And when he's blowing in there, I know it can be hard to tell right now, but he's blowing really, really softly. It's sort of like a balloon. If we have really hot glass and we blow really hard, that bubble can really easily pop. So you want to be gentle with the material. That's one of the hardest things for me, is that like you think of glass as this really hard material, something that you can sort of really hit on and it won't break. But in here we have to be really, really gentle just because of how gooey it is. It can really change shape really easily. Colin's gonna shape it up a little bit more, give it a little more air. Just gonna make sure that shoulder is nice and inflated. And we inflate that shoulder because that's actually gonna be the opening of our piece. So we're gonna get ready and we're gonna flip this thing around later on. But when we're working in here, we're sort of working from the top down, which is a little bit backwards from ceramics. Doing it again? You ready? So we're gonna put a foot on this thing, and this is sort of like the human body thing I talked about earlier. A foot is gonna allow this to make really nice contact with the table. So when we're designing in here, we have to think about objects like wine bottles. They have that nice ring on the bottom. Colin, what do you want for your punty? The step down or the counterweight?
Step down.
Okay. I'm gonna steal your diamond shears. So I'm gonna make Colin a cookie foot, which is just like a little cookie of glass that we can stick onto the bottom of this bubble. And remember, hot glass sticks to hot glass really easily. So even though Colin's bubble is a little bit more set up, this fresh hot cookie can really easily just fuse onto the bottom. Letting this set up. I'm taking what's called a double dip. So it's just a little bit more glass than a single dip. So I'm gonna go straight up and down, and that glass will just nicely pool off. And Colin can come on over. He's just gonna stick his bubble right to the bottom. And since that glass is like fresh out of the furnace, it's still really, really malleable. When it's at that 2150, it's really, really elastic. So I could take the end of that pipe that I just cut off and grab one end and pull and pull and pull. And Colin could take one pipe and I could take the other, and we could run all the way to the parking lot. So since Colin has that nice heat in there, he can really have a little bit of time to manipulate this foot without having to worry about his bubble. Once this is nice and hot, Colin's gonna go in with his newspaper. And he's gonna use his fingers to physically change the shape of this foot. So remember that wine bottle, if you look at the bottom, it's got that nice indent. Colin's physically creating that with his hand. So he's sticking his thumb into the bottom and he's physically pushing up an indent while shaping the sides of the foot with the sides of the paper or his other fingers. You want a paddle? I got this nice wooden paddle. This is made out of the same cherry wood. Colin obviously only has two hands, so he needs a third person to sort of make sure this is nice and flat and will make good contact with the table. Yeah, that's nice. Cookie feet are really nice because they had a nice design element, but they also really sort of cheat the bottom weight system. So you always know you got plenty of material on the bottom. You ready? You want to let it set up? Since that foot is really, really hot, we're going to go ahead and punty this thing, so we're going to flip it around. But since that foot is so hot and the bubble is so cold, Colin's going to take a little quick minute and make sure it's nice and even out. When we go to do our punty transfer, this is sort of the time in the piece that you have to worry about the most. So if I'm too hot or Colin is too hot, it'll totally fuse to the bottom and we won't be able to get it off the pipe. But if either of us is too cold, it can really easily fall off now. You ready? So I'm gonna make Colin a punty. I'm gonna give you back your diamond shears really quick. And this is just a little connection point that we can stick onto the bottom. So I want to make sure this is a nice Q-tip shape, just like a fresh gather out of the furnace. This is sort of a connection designed to fail. So I'm going to give this a quick heat. Do you need to take another flash? Do you want to take one more? Oh, you're right. My bad. Too jazzed. I'm going to give this a quick heat. Then Colin can go ahead and stick me onto the bottom. Make sure we're nice and on center. And as he's turning, he's sort of pushing down with his tweezers to make sure this punty's in the center of our bowl. I can take that. Yeah. Colin's going to use a little bit of water, a little bit of vibration, and we'll come right off the pipe. I'm going to give this a quick flash, and flashes are just maintenance heats. We'll sort of talk about flashing a little bit more later on. But that glass was just cold enough for us to physically break it, which is sort of really different from all of the different states of matter we've seen in it before. So Colin's got a little bit of heat on that punty. He's going to make sure he can straighten this bowl out a little bit. What's up? Colin's got his little baby paddle. He can make sure it's nice and straight. But now we'll start to heat that lip up, and this is sort of our longest heat. You notice Colin's up and down a lot, and you can sort of be a lot with the movement. But to get that lip all the way up to working temperature, he'll be up by the reheating chamber for about 45 seconds to a minute. And that doesn't seem like a long time, but when you're up there in front of the hole with the doors open, it can feel like a long time. We have these nice set of doors so we can sort of open and close them as we need. Once you have to start sort of opening the third set of doors, you really need a third person to just open the doors, so that way you can keep them closed as much as possible. Otherwise it gets very hot and you get very sweaty. Are you trimming this? No, you don't need to. If Colin ever had any like weirdness at the top, he could take his shears or his jacks and physically cut that off and make sure it's nice and even. But with a bowl, you want to keep that nice low shape, especially a low bowl. So as long as Colin's got his original jack line in there nice and tight, he can really just open it right up. Oh, you need a paddle, don't you? I'm going to come on our lip with a paddle. And this is to just sort of make sure the lip stays nice and straight. Colin's going with his jacks, and he's using them almost like a mold. So he can physically open that up a little bit. And Colin's working in the round the entire time, so he's turning. So he doesn't want to just lift his jacks up really quickly. He's sort of slowly working and opening that bubble up from all sides. Gotta make complete rotations. I kind of like it how it is. Yeah, with that nice little top.
Oh, like that? Yeah. Song of Bloomdale.
So what Colin's doing right now, and what can be really tricky with bowls, is that he doesn't want to get the back part of his bubble too hot, but he also needs to make sure that his punny stays warm enough that it's not going to break off. So he's doing what we call spot heating and just heating up that front. And with this color, it's a little tough to tell, but you can sort of see that heat line. So just the very front of the piece is hot, where the back's a little bit cooler. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. On.
Coming on with the paddle just to make sure that lip stays nice and flat.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine.
Might have you right in the head.
I can do that. Do you want a sandwich?
Yeah.
Let me find a second paddle. I lied, I only have one paddle over here. I can tiny paddle it.
Our trophy time.
Colin's gonna go in with a special tool called our parchofis, or some people will call them casually the lumberjacks. So they're basically jacks just made out of wood. And one of the advantages to using wooden tools is that it's not gonna take out as much heat as the jacks will. So you'll notice while Colin's using the jacks on the front, he has to move back and forth between the reheating chamber really quickly.
Come on the back.
So those lumberjacks will give him a little bit extra time.
Oh.
I'm coming on the back with a paddle just to make sure that foot doesn't move too much.
Well, you don't have to use a baby paddle.
Well, I couldn't find a second paddle. I guess I have this paddle in my hand. And Colin's just keeping those jacks nice and waterlogged. They're pretty fresh right now. Those are a new set. But over time, they'll sort of start to build up that charcoal layer that's on the pipe, or on the paddles. It'll cause this bowl to spin out into a plate. That's not really what he's going for. That is how he would make a plate if he wanted to make a plate, but and when I'm going on the back, that punny will heat up pretty quickly in there since the bowl is so shallow. I'm just making sure it stays nice and flat. That way we don't have to even out the foot later on. This is sort of the low and slow process. So you'll notice how careful Colin is with his turning. It can really easily go haywire.
Like that.
It's okay.
Oh my gosh.
Low bowls are one of the more challenging shapes in glass. I know people who spend like all of their time just trying to make low bowls and have done it for like 10 years.
If you can find a larger paddle, I'll have you go on front and back.
Yeah, I'll be right back. So now we're going to give this thing a little bit of a sandwich. So that way we can make sure the top and the bottom are nice and parallel. No baby paddle.
Oh, I'll be there.
That's okay. It happens. We gotta give this thing a nice sandwich.
Come on.
On both?
Yeah.
My paddle does catch fire a little bit, but that's okay. I just give it a quick and then it blows out. You sort of have to get used to fire in here. You can't really be scared of it anymore. I know people ask a lot if we get burned a lot, and it's not as much as you would expect. When you first start out, you sort of get burned a lot in a lot of different spaces, but then over time you learn not to do those things. I know I get burned in my kitchen more than I do in here. And you'll notice Colin isn't wearing any gloves, and neither am I. You'd think that you'd want to wear gloves to sort of protect your hands from the heat, but it actually causes you to lose a lot of the dexterity that you need to turn that pipe. Colin's going in with his paper and changing up the shape a little bit. This is a really nice time to use your paper because you can really feel all the different sides of the bowl. Something might look straight, but sometimes that can sort of trick you because of the optic qualities of glass. So you gotta go in and physically feel it out. I'm guessing we're gonna do this a couple more times. On the outside? When we're working with this, we really have to think about the bubble from both sides. It's all right. You want me on the lip? Colin going with the jacks, giving it a little bit of crispy. The jacks are really nice when you want to make really crisp lines in something. So Colin has that nice sort of trumpety shape on the sides of our bowl. You want to do it again?
I don't know much more there is to do.
Sometimes we can get a little bit nitpicky. I know a lot of people think of hand-blown glass as something that's a little bit more organic, but if I know Colin, he wants his work to look machine-made.
Come on, Bud.
So I have the problem of being like, I'm just gonna touch it again. I'm just gonna.
Push more on the front. Here's what it is.
I like to nitpick and do things over and over again. But more often than not with glass, you really only have one shot to do something. And it's a lot easier for us to just throw the piece away and then start over. You good?
Yeah.
So now we're gonna get ready to take this thing off. So Colin's gonna do what we call flashing down. So he wants to even out the heat in that piece just because that lip was just hot enough for us to manipulate. But he also wants to heat that punny up so that way we have a little bit of movement in there, and that way we can use the same principle that we use to take this thing off of the blowpipe in order to take it off of our punny rod. So Colin has his lovely MAP gas torch there. He could flash it down just in the reheating chamber, but that's sort of an aggressive heat from all areas. In order to get that plenty hot enough for us to take this off, he would have to get the lip hot enough to move. So this torch and a lot of different torches that we use allow us to spot heat just one area. Good? Okay, I'll go put on my jacket. So I'm gonna suit up in a nice Kevlar outfit. The air in the room is too cold for the glass, right? So if we were to just knock this off and leave it out in room temperature air, it's actually gonna crack and break into a million pieces. So we're gonna put it into our annealing oven, which is gonna allow us to cool it at a rate that's slow enough that it's not gonna break. Are we taking off over here? Okay. So I have a nice pair of Kevlar gloves so I can grab this thing. I'm gonna give them a little bit of a preheat. Colin's gonna use a little bit of water and he's gonna go right up to where the punty makes contact with the foot. And he can give it a little tap and that vibration enough to take that thing off. That punty came off nice.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Colin's gonna give it a quick torch with our hot torch. It's good not to look at this. It's bad for your eyes. That nice glowing light is sodium flare, which is what welders have to protect themselves against. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick it up. Boop, boop. and then we put it away in our annealing oven. So that oven sits at about 920. That's sort of the annealing temperature for glass. So it's in that solid state that we're familiar with, but it's enough of a heat that it won't crack really quickly. So the thickest part of that glass is that foot, which is about that thick. So that's gonna cool down over about 24 hours. So we do have some pieces in our collection that are cast glass, so they're really, really thick. So we have that bench in the ancient gallery. Those cool down for about 11 months, because you never want your glass to be too much of a temperature difference on the different levels of layers. So we'll let that thing cool down quickly overnight, and then we'll take it out pretty much tomorrow at the same time. If you guys have any questions, you can comment them to Misha, and he can read them to me.
We do have one question.
Oh, yeah.
We have somebody that wants to know how hot is the torch that you used on the bottom?
How hot is the MAP gas? It's probably, oh, the hot torch? The hot torch can get really, really hot. We can crank that thing up. It's a balance between natural gas and oxygen. So Collins, we have a sand casting workshop that you guys can find on our website. Other than that, we're doing these demonstrations Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So if you guys want to tune back into us at 2 o'clock, you guys can tune back into us on Sunday at 2, and we'll be here. Thanks for watching.